Welcome to the Weekly Roar, coming live from the Lion's Den, helping new managers become great leaders and awesome bosses. And now, here's your host, Greg Storch.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Weekly Roar. It's great to have you all back in the Lion's Den for this week's watch party. Today, I'm talking about another pivot as we continue with my series called Inevitable Change, Making Pivots in Your Leadership. But before we get into that, I'm Greg Storch, the founder of Lion Enterprise, a leadership development and coaching business where I'm focusing on helping organizations create winning cultures. I'm a certified professional coach and a certified leadership speaker and trainer. Last week, I spoke about another pivot where I highlighted the reasons why leadership isn't so much about what we get from it as it is what we can give with it. This particular pivot was all about switching our focus away from the benefits we get from being a leader and seeing the price that you have to pay to stay the leader. I also mentioned 3 things that you'll want to be prepared to pay the price for if you commit to making that pivot. If you weren't able to see the Weekly Roar last Wednesday, don't worry about it. Just head to my website at www.lion-enterprise.com. Check out video number 75 for last week's session in the Lion's Pride Library, where you can also find all of my other videos. The Lion's Pride Library is free, and it's a great way for you to get more of the roar. Okay, let's talk about another potential pivot we could potentially need to make in our own leadership. And it's the pivot away from trying to be a people pleaser. One of the most important things we can do for our followers is challenge them, because that's how they grow. But sometimes we just want to please them instead, and so they go unchallenged. I can tell you from my own personal experience, and you probably already know this, at least I hope so, but trying to please everyone is a failing proposition. You'll never please everyone. But as leaders, it can be such an easy trap for us to fall into. Sometimes we can focus on just making people happy. And if they're happy, then we must be doing a great job leading them, right? Wrong. Pleasing people is not leading people. And to be honest with you, this is a lesson I learned later in my career. I actually used to think that if I was making everyone happy, then I was leading well. It was a challenge because I've always gotten along well with others. And I've been able to use my smile, my positive attitude, my energy, and my sense of humor to do that. But there are just some people out there who can't even be won over with that combo. Now, the real problem comes for leaders who spend their time focused on trying to please everyone. That can be very time-consuming, chasing after that unhappy person and making an effort trying to change that. The problem that arises for leaders is that we begin spending our time with the unhappiest and least committed people we have. Remember a few weeks ago when I mentioned the Pareto principle, that 80-20 rule? Well, when you're trying to make everyone happy, that's a surefire way to make sure you'll get the Pareto principle backwards, and you'll be spending too much of your time with the wrong people. So, how did I know that I was spending my time trying to be a people pleaser? Well, I used to walk around and speak with people on my teams, and one of the things I would always ask them was, hey, everything good? I just walk around every time I saw them. Hey, everything good? All good? Good? The minute someone would tell me what wasn't good, I'd go to work on fixing it. The problem was that I was spending time focused on fixing issues for others to be happy. And so when I was focused there, I wasn't focused on leading them and running the contract. So is this resonating with any of you? Do you find yourself just trying to make everyone happy? What about those of you who are the leaders in your families? Don't we see that quite a bit when we're raising children? We just want to make them happy, right? If you answered yes, or you even think this might be an issue, if you believe that your effectiveness as a leader is measured by the gauge of happiness, then let's talk about some of the things we can do as leaders to help us make this pivot away from being a people pleaser and start to focus more on challenging them. It's a pivot away from what feels right for you to doing what's right for your people. One of the first things we can do is start to take ourselves out of the equation, or at least don't make yourself the priority in every decision you make as a leader. When we start to focus on trying to make the best decisions for the organization or our families or the congregation or the communities where we live, we start to change the dynamic of how we interact with those we're leading. So making the pivot to focus on what's best for the organization moves things from heart to head and places our focus on leadership responsibilities, not everyone's happiness. And when we can do that, we have the ability to make them better, not just make them happy. This is really about a shift away from thinking about yourself to thinking about others first. If you need people, you can't lead people. So focusing on leadership and all the things we have to do in order to move things forward under a common vision that's going to help you to move away from prioritizing the need to feel good about yourself. When we stop chasing things that we'll never achieve, like everyone's happiness, we can begin to place our focus where it needs to be in order to really lead others. It gives us the ability to see our vision more clearly and take actions that are actually going to get us all there. If we don't pivot and set our focus to how we can help others and improve our organization, we'll remain limited in our leadership. So that's the first thing. Focus on leadership and not on making everyone happy. Okay, another thing we can do as leaders is make sure that we're valuing others. And that starts by seeing your own value. If we see our own value, we can invest in others. Think of it like this, if you need a visual. Every time you see someone on your team, look at them as if you're looking in a mirror, because how you see yourself is how you'll see them. This is a place where you really need to start with yourself and find out how you really see yourself. Do you see value in yourself? Do you see yourself as being worthy of growth? To get the best out of people, you have to believe the best about them. And when you can see the best in others as a leader, you will have no problem giving them your best and asking for the same in return. Now, I've told you before that my wife works in her first real leadership position here in Italy, and it's at a nonprofit organization. One of the things I remind her of is to make sure she sets her expectations up front. People need to know what you expect if they are ever going to try to meet those expectations. Good leaders do that. They set expectations at the beginning to avoid disappointment in the end. They don't make their followers guess what they're looking for. They already know because the expectations have been set up front. My wife just hired a temporary replacement employee who's filling in for one of the other employee who is out on maternity leave. The position has the potential of turning into a permanent position on her team. So she has spent the entire first week sitting with the new employee, discussing all of her expectations. Already, the new employee is showing real promise. By my wife setting her expectations of the position up front, she's setting the employee up for success. When you're up front with your followers, then you're out in front as a leader. Okay, another thing you can do, if you aren't doing it already, if you want to pivot towards doing what's right for your people and your organization, properly prepare yourself for having those difficult conversations. Yes, there is a proper way to prepare to have them. Now, if you've been in a leadership role for any amount of time, this is one of the biggest challenges we can face, right? Having to have that difficult conversation with someone. Why? Maybe because we fear being disliked. Unfortunately, my wife has been having her fair share of these conversations over the past 6 months. Between employees repeatedly making the same mistakes and failing to meet the expectations that were set, to managing a volunteer force of about 50 people, she has to do this more times than I can count. But before that conversation ever occurs, leaders have to properly prepare themselves for it. And part of that preparation is understanding how the problem or issue occurred in the first place. See, what you're trying to do is identify the source of the issue. Is it an external issue, an issue with the person you have to speak with, or is it an issue with you? It could be one or all of these things, and depending on how many factors have contributed to the situation is going to determine how difficult that conversation is going to be. So maybe you've determined that the tough conversation is needed. And if that's the case, then there's actually a right way and a wrong way to do it. This is another thing to work on if you think you need to make this pivot away from pleasing people towards leading them and challenging them. In order to have that tough conversation go well, or at least give it the best chances for a favorable outcome, your attitude is going to play a major role. Why? Because our attitudes towards things manifest themselves in our actions. And as leaders, our actions can carry more weight than our words. So keep the main thing the main thing. Focus on why the conversation is happening in the first place. And that is because you care enough to confront. Now, I'm not telling you as a leader to be confrontational in the meeting. What I'm saying is that this isn't about making someone happy and pretending that everything's all right. It's about being able to confront and challenge those we lead in order to make them better and to help them to grow. The goal of these difficult conversations is to help the person, and we can best attempt to do that when we seek to understand. How do we do that? We do it by asking the right questions and allowing the other person to respond to them. Now, is this going to make every difficult conversation end in unicorns and rainbows? Of course not. But it's a great end to have in mind when you get started. Now, the worst case is that you will definitely find out where each of you stand instead of ignoring it with your head in the sand. Without the attempt at a resolution and just ignoring it, you'll guarantee the issue will remain unresolved. Another way to focus on the organization and what's best for the people in it is to have the ability to get people to rise up and become their best. But that's not an easy thing for leaders to do. In any group, there are always those who support and will follow you. And then there are a larger group, a majority of the people who are just trying to figure you out and aren't sure if they want to follow you or not. And then there are those who have already made up their minds that they're not doing it. They're not following you. Our job as leaders is to sway the vote, so to speak, right? We want to get our biggest fans to convert those who are kind of undecided. It's just like in an election year. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about politics. I know better than that. But specifically in politics, we've seen this where a presidential candidate will start focusing their campaign efforts on the undecided voters to try to get them to join the others who are voting for them. So you want to do the same thing as a leader. Focus on the undecided employees and flex those who already subscribe to your leadership to help you bring them along. The last thing that you want is for them to be influenced by the voters, those employees who are certain that they're not voting for the candidate or are not following you as the leader. As leaders, we kind of deal with the same thing in politics, right? And understanding that can help us work with all three of those groups in order to influence the undecided people to join the supporters. So here's some tips when you're trying to, get the majority in line, following, and influence. First, never spend time trying to convert those who are resistant to your leadership. Just accept that they're never going to become a fan of yours as a leader, not as a person, but as a leader. Try to limit their influence on the ones who aren't fully committed to you yet. And you can do that by making sure you never give the naysayers any credibility. Don't give them a reason to be like, see, told you so. Focus on the people who support you and follow you. Have them influence those in the middle who could lean one way or the other. The more people you can pull to the side to support your vision and help you achieve it, the better the odds of your organization moving in the right direction. Of course, it makes sense, right? Now, this one reminds me of a scene from the movie Grease. Every morning at Rydell High, Principal McGee would get on the intercom and make announcements. And one morning she says, "And remember, if you can't be an athlete, then at least be an athletic supporter." Okay, I digress. Here's one more tip on challenging people instead of focusing on trying to just make them happy. Now, this is really a balancing act, and it isn't one that comes naturally to us. We tend to be on one side or the other, but the lesson is to have a nice balance of both. What I'm talking about is the importance of developing the ability to care about the people you're leading while still being real with them. You can't spare their development and improvement through challenging them because you don't want to hurt their feelings. A good leader can balance both. They can care and challenge. One of the best quotes that I've ever heard that speaks directly to this is by John Maxwell, who said, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." You can care about people and still have tough, honest conversations with them. As a matter of fact, it's because you care about them that you have those conversations, right? So if you feel like you may tend to be a people pleaser, you want to make everyone happy, then maybe this pivot is what you need to move away from pleasing them and to start positively challenging them. I just shared quite a few ways that will help you to make this pivot. I talked about changing focus away from what's best for you to what's best for your organization or your team. The importance of valuing yourself highly so you can value others. Why leaders should set expectations first and early with their followers, and how to prepare yourself for the hard conversations by considering the source of the problem. And if you have that difficult conversation with someone, remember, it's coming from a place of caring. And sometimes caring means confronting. Understand how enlisting the help of your biggest supporters to bring along the rest of the team, and of course, finding a good mix of tough love. As leaders, we can care about our people, and in doing so, challenge them with honest conversations that will ultimately help them and the organization move forward. I hope this pivot is helpful for you. That's another one for you to consider from inevitable change, making pivots in your leadership. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in again for the weekly roar. As always, I hope you know how much I appreciate you. Remember, please help me to influence other leaders and help them grow by sharing out this link to my weekly roar video that I'm going to post here in the Lion's Den Facebook page right after this watch party. Hey, I'm going to be back here next week in the Lion's Den speaking about another pivot we can make in our leadership. Now, next week, I want to talk about making the pivot away from being a people pleaser and talk a little bit about why pleasing people is not leading them. I hope you're going to join me. All right, everybody, until we meet again next week, remember, be powerful, but stay poised just like a lion. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Weekly Roar live event at lionenterprise.com. If you enjoyed this video, please tell others to join us each week here in the Lion's Den. Thanks again, and see you next week.